So let's get into the science of feelings and emotions. So I'm going to show you how feelings and emotion is created in your brain and in your body. I love this, but it's really interesting. So basically your feelings come from your interpretation of life, and your interpretation comes from, or should I say, the information for you to interpret comes from your senses. So it comes from your what you taste, what you touch, what you hear, what you see, what you smell. It also comes from your intuition or your gut feelings. Now, intuition is something that actually comes through your body. So it's not something that comes through your head. It's more a sensory feeling that you just feel within your body. It's almost like something that bypasses your brain and your mind. And this is a really interesting thing when it comes to intuition, and another very important aspect of becoming emotionally intelligent, because intuition is what keeps us safe. It's that aspect of us that we all have, that we all need to learn to tune into, that tells us when there's something wrong or unsafe about somebody or some place. So very important. So our interpretation of life comes through our six senses, but how we interpret that is based on our beliefs, our values, and our needs. So, and also on our memories, because we all have, and I'm going to explain a little bit further, but we all have values in life. We all have beliefs. A lot of them we don't even know what they are because they're buried so deeply into the unconscious mind. Everything that has happened to us in life has created a memory and an image in the brain. So when all this information comes through our senses, we interpret that information based on the past and on our values and on our needs, which we'll get into a little bit further. So we need to take a closer look at the brain in order for you to understand this. And I'm going to simplify this as much as possible. So pay a little bit of attention, but I like to keep things very simple. So this is a diagram of the human brain. Now, I'm just going to be talking about three parts of the brain because there's different aspects of the brain. You get the left side of the brain that controls the right side of the body. You get the right side of the brain that controls the left side of the body, and then you've got different levels of the brain. So we're going to look at three different levels of the brain. Now I'm going to be talking about the reptilian brain. Now the reptilian brain is also called the dinosaur brain or the instinctual brain, because this is the part of the brain that keeps us safe. So all your flight and flight response kind of come from there, but I will explain this in a little bit of detail. And then we have the limbic brain, which is here in the middle of your actual brain. And this is where your emotions and your memories are housed. And then you have the rational part of the brain, or your thinking brain, and which is called the neocortex. I just like to refer to these as the first, second, and third, because as I said, there's many aspects, but let's take a closer look at that so you can have a better understanding and how the three parts of the brain work together, and you'll see how it all fits in. Now, the first brain, which is also known as the lower part of the brain, as I said, is also called the reptilian brain. Now, this part of the brain, as you can see over here, is responsible for the following functions and basic drives. So the fight, flight, or freeze response. It is responsible for hormonal control, temperature control, hunger and thirst, your reproductive drive, and your respiration and your heart rate control. So this is kind of the part of the brain that you don't even have to think about when to eat, when to breathe. It keeps your heart beating because it controls all the survival parts of our bodies that keep us alive. That's basically what this part of the brain is for. So your reptilian brain is very much in charge, because obviously without this part of the brain, and it's also the oldest part of the brain, because this is what is so interesting. If you look back into history and you look at the cavemen and you even look back 50 years ago, people weren't talking about the emotional brain. They weren't talking about the rational brain. because those part of the brains were not really developed yet. So if you go back to the cavemen, they only operated from their reptilian brain. They didn't have these other parts of the brain. It hadn't evolved yet. So the reptilian brain was very much in charge, and in a lot of people today, the reptilian brain is still in charge. A lot of people still function on survival because they haven't learned yet how to connect to their emotional brain or to get to understand their emotional brain, and also haven't learned yet how to use their rational brain because they're kind of out of sync. Now let's look at the second part of the brain. So the second part of the brain is the middle part of the brain, and this part is also known as the emotional brain, and the functions and the basic drives that this part of the brain is in charge of is territory. So territoriality, meaning, so if you think about your territory, or even, you look at some animals have an emotional brain as well. So dogs are very territorial. So that is what that means. It's also responsible for fear, anger, maternal love, social bonding, jealousy, and all emotions. So you can see this part of the brain is all about your happiness. It's about relationships. It's about creativity, your social bonding, and how you bond with your parents and your friends. This is what the middle part of the brain is responsible for. Now, the emotional brain, I just want to show you a little bit more, because as I just said to you earlier on, we all have memories, and when we interpret life, we interpret it based on, as I said, our values and our beliefs, but we also interpret it based on our memories. So let me give you an idea. So say, for instance, you were scared of spiders. You weren't born being scared of spiders, but what usually happens is maybe your mom or dad was scared of spiders. So they react emotionally when you got close to a spider. This then creates a memory, and that memory is one of, we should be scared of spiders. You should fear spiders. So you then react emotionally based on that memory that is lodged in your brain from what happened the very first time that you encountered a spider. And that's just what happens. So all your memories, all the pictures of what has happened in your past is all housed in your emotional brain, and which is called your amygdala or amygdala. And this is where all your memories, in this tiny little thing, all your emotions and all your memories of what has happened to you in the past is housed in this tiny little almond-shaped nodule that is in the middle part of your brain. You can just see another little image there. So that's just a little bit more about your emotional brain. Now, your third brain, which is the upper part of the brain, which is here, this blue section over here, is called the cortex. Now, it's also called the logical or the rational brain. Now, this part of the brain is responsible for self-awareness of thoughts and emotions. It gives you the ability to choose appropriate behavior. It helps you to have self-reflection. It's also the part of the brain that you use for problem solving and also for goal satisfaction. So that's the logical part of your brain. Now, an interesting thing about the logical brain is that this part of the brain only gets turned on at the age of around 24. Now, sometimes this part of the brain can get turned on earlier if a child or a teenager has been pushed into a situation where they have to grow up really quickly and become really responsible. Often this happens when teenagers have a baby and they suddenly have to become responsible for another person, but most of the time this part of the brain only switches on at 24. And just going back to the emotional brain, just so that you know this as well, is that the emotional brain only kicks in at the age of 4. Now, there are some children that it does develop a little bit earlier. And obviously children do start developing their emotional brain from 2 upwards. but it's only really functioning properly round about the age of 4. And just to also go back to the reptilian brain, or the lower part of the brain, this part of the brain, this is babies operate in this part of the brain for the first 2 to 4 years of their life. So everything for them is about survival. So they cry when they're wet, they cry when they're hungry, they cry when they're cold, when they cry when they're too hot. Everything for them is about survival. So they're only operating from this part of the brain up until the age of about 4. When the emotional brain kicks in, and then this part of the brain, that is why we all get so frustrated with teenagers. That's why you can't rationalize with them. Teenagers are all about emotion. They just work from the emotional brain from the age of 4 and upwards, and because they don't know how to be logic, they don't know how to be rational. And that's why I always say to parents, you've got to be their rational brain until their rational brain kicks in. You've got to tell them what is good for them. Sometimes we've got to be the bad cop and say, too much screen time is going to hurt their brain. If they don't have enough sleep, it's going to hurt their brain. If they have too much sugar. So you kind of have to be their rational brain until it kicks in. But we'll talk about that later on, or in some of the advanced courses. So let's go back to looking at all 3 brains together. So now I just want to explain to you a little bit about when the emotional brain is in charge. So if you think about children now between the ages of 4 up until 24, and then also adults who have never developed their emotional intelligence and haven't got all 3 of their brains working together, this is what happens when you have too much of the one brain in charge. So think about it now that I just mentioned it about babies, when their survival brain is what operates most of the time until the age of 4. They're all about screaming, crying, tantrums. Everything is about feeling safe and being safe. Then from that age, from 4 onwards, the emotional brain is in charge. But you can teach children. So even though their rational brain hasn't really kicked in, you can teach them about their emotional brain and teach them how to be intelligent about their emotions. But this is what happens when they don't understand their emotional brain and they don't understand their emotions, and it kind of rules their life. So I want to show you a little bit more here of how that information is interpreted. So the information is received through the senses. So in this case, it goes through the eyes and it goes through to the visual cortex. And that's where it's sort of translated. And then it goes to the amygdala, which I said is the emotional sentinel. And then that information goes up to the logical brain, where you then decide what you're going to do. So we've got something called the thalamus, which you can see as an air traffic controller. So the thalamus is responsible for kind of like, it's almost like as I said, like an air traffic controller, but it sends all the information to where it goes. But now what happens when the emotional brain is in charge, it bypasses all of this. Think back to a situation where you've done or said something, you've heard something, you've jumped to conclusions, and then you blurt something out, and then you go, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't said that. That is when we actually operate from the emotional brain. Now, and the reason we do that is because the information that this whole process here, where the information comes in, and it gets translated and it goes and then to the logical brain. That takes 6 seconds. Now, you might not think that 6 seconds is a lot of time, but if you count it, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, it actually is quite a bit of time. So what you need to do is to wait for that information to get to your rational brain, where you can make a decision, make a choice about how you're going to respond based on the information that you have just received. So I just want to highlight or recap, should I say, how your emotions and how you're feeling are created within from your senses and within your brain. So the information is received through your senses, it goes into the brain, it then creates a thought. The thought creates a feeling, and the feeling creates the emotion, the energy to move based on that feeling. And all your actions are based on that emotion, because your emotion and your feelings are tied together. This is the energy that is created by that feeling. And being emotionally intelligent means that you wait for that emotion, you wait for the 6 seconds to pass for that emotion or that feeling or that interpretation, that thought, whatever goes on there, to get to the rational brain so that you can make a conscious decision of what you are going to do with that information that you have received. So this is just a little countdown. As I said, 6 seconds is quite a bit longer than we even realize. And if you think about how quickly you have thoughts and how many words you speak a minute or how many things you think about a minute, 6 seconds can be a long time when you are waiting or when you are reacting based on information instead of waiting for that information to get to your rational brain. So at the end of the day, being emotionally intelligent is all about learning how to get those 3 brain levels, your survival brain, your emotional brain, and your logical brain, to work in conjunction, to work as a team, and which then obviously helps you to fire from all cylinders. If you think about cars, a car doesn't work very well if it's only firing from one cylinder. So when you are congruent and you engage your whole brain, this is what makes you emotionally intelligent.